Hey guys, sorry it's been a while, 7 months I guess. Anyway, I decided I would go ahead and do another video, maybe a series on um, minimal solo D&D. Anyway, so I wanted to kind of show what I've been doing and what I'm learning, and maybe if you guys have some feedback and suggestions, that'd be fine. There's a lot on the internet, so but this is how I'm approaching it. So I'll talk about tools, what I refer to as the rigid or fixed elements, DM mode versus player mode, the Milton method, yes and no questions for the Oracle, and journaling. All right. So for me, the tools that I'm using are really basic, really simple. I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons since I was 12 back in 1976, and so I know Dungeons and Dragons really, really well. I played Basic and AD&D and 3rd edition and 3.5 and 5th edition, other role-playing games as well. But what I've chosen for solo Dungeons and Dragons, the old school Senses, OSE is very familiar to me. It's like going home kind of for me, and so that keeps it simple for me. I found out on Drive Through RPG, the one page it's called one page solo engine. Sorry, one page solo engine by Carl Hendricks. And it's an oracle, but it has a little bit more to it than just a simple six-sided yes or no. But it's good. So those are the kind of the main two tools that I use when I'm putting an adventure together for myself. One of the things I do, and I kind of, because I DM a lot, I tend to spend a lot of time DMing in the years I've been playing. I haven't played as much, so solo RPG is a good opportunity for me to DM myself and kind of have some fun with it. So I use a world as a background, and I'm using the Wilderlands from Treasure's Guild. I played it back in the 80s, and so I'm familiar with it. And then I bought some products since then, and I don't hold to it tightly, but I use it as a world to DM in. So there's some elements that I can go look up, right? So for fixed elements, when solo RPGs, when you're soloing or playing a game, there's a lot of weird, wacky stuff that you can do, right? With random tables, random events, interpreting the oracle results, and those types of things. And what I found is having defined fixed elements of the game world, to interpret those things that are randomly generated in context is really key. So the world setting, creating a home base for my player character. So I'll show you that. I created a real simple village of Ost, Frostforge, that's within 150 miles of the state of the Invincible Overlord in map section 1, if you're familiar with the Wilderlands. And one of the things that I've tried to put together when putting a game session for myself is focusing on mundane stuff initially, right? So in the DM mode, I'm not trying to create really things fantastic. It's already a fantasy world, right? So that's not something I need to worry about. Those elements are going to come in regardless. So I create a city, and then in player mode, I've created a character. I decided to create new characters. I go through and create characters all the time. It's something I do. Learning game systems. So I created this dwarf, Orn, and using an index card, keeping things again simple, and pretty tight, right? So the tools that you need, obviously, are those the game system and knowing that game system well, or using the game system to learn the game system. You can do that with Solo, creating characters and playing through some simple scenarios. The Oracle having a way of getting results outside of your own control through dice rolls and things like that. So I've been switching between DM mode, where I'm creating the world and the rigid elements, and player mode, where I'm making choices for my player character, rolling up my player character, doing things with the player character, things like that. So one of the things that I've done also is I have had this journal for a very, very long time, and it's an empty, gridded journal with massive number. I mean, this is more than an inch thick, probably 500 pages, maybe more. I've had this for a few decades, and it's overwhelming, right? So I thought I would create a mega dungeon with it at one time, but it's too daunting. So I've gotten other journals that are much thinner that I can finish, and I don't feel as overwhelmed. But for solo playing, I decided to just dive in and use this. If my character dies, I can create a new character and just keep going, and just kind of use that methodology. So also I use what's referred to as the Milton method, or at least I'm calling it the Milton method. I don't know, maybe somebody else might use that term. When setting the scene for adventuring, so the character would start out, what happened yesterday, and write that down. What happened earlier that same day, and then what's happened moments ago before action starts, and then get into the game session, and do that really simply, right? And so some of the things that I've done, what I have in my shirt, Hammer shirt, that's cool, is really just keeping the game moving forward, scene by scene, and using the mechanics of a turn-based game has really helped. One of the things that is really good about the old school essentials is they really spell out, what the turn sequence is for dungeoning, being in dungeons or being in the wilderness, and then they have random tables and all that. So keeping it really simple helps move things forward really quickly. What I found with Mythic and some of the other solo RPG tools is that the tool ends up I spend way too much time in the tool, working with the tool, thinking about the tool, working through the results, and then very little time actually in play. And so I've pared it down. It's good to read those and get ideas about how to run a solo adventure, but setting it up and then doing the game session. So let me next I'll talk a little bit about what I've got. So I created a town, a very small town. It doesn't have very many buildings, about 4 or 5 buildings. And I created a map. I'll show the map. And then I also populated it with some NPCs, so I can interact with them. So there's a daily store, a butcher, or like a boutique kind of foodie place, a stock house, right, for stocking up on stuff, and then a forge. And so I've created some NPCs. And that's kind of interesting to do that randomly, not detailing them out as I would a character, but having some key elements for the NPC. So the daily store is run by a very venerable, old female orc. She goes by Nori. Her real name is Norgal. Not Nurgle, but Nargle. And she goes by Nori, or Nari. She's very old, and she's pretending, or she's impersonating an old human woman, right? So she's thinks that she's in disguise. Of course, my dwarf character can immediately identify her as an orc to run a solo adventure, but setting it up and then doing the game session. So let me next I'll talk a little bit about what I've got set. So I created a town, a very small town. It doesn't have very many buildings, about 4 or 5 buildings. And I created a map. I'll show the map. And then I also populated it with some NPCs, so I can interact with them. So there's a daily store, a butcher, or like a boutique kind of foodie place, a stock house, right, for stocking up on stuff, and then a forge. And so I've created some NPCs. And that's kind of interesting to do that randomly, not detailing them out as I would a character, but having some key elements for the NPC. So the daily store is run by a very venerable old female orc. She goes by Nori. Her real name is Norgal. Not Nurgle, but Nargle. And she goes by Nori, or Nari. She's very old, and she's pretending, or she's impersonating an old human woman, right? So she's thinks that she's in disguise. Of course, my dwarf character can immediately identify her as an orc, but she's trying to live in a human establishment. She's very poor, and her quality of her products are pretty poor. So I created a random table. So if we're going to purchase something from her, I'd roll and see if the product is good, fair, or bad, right? And then take that into account when I'm playing. Havoc is the name of the shop that is run by Moro Harfoot. He's a hobbit, and he's befriended my character. And so that's some of the things that I've pointed out, is that as I'm putting these things down, these are fixed elements, right? And I'm just deciding as a DM that these things are already in place. And so it makes it a lot easier for me to then play against those elements that are random or surprising, can be interpreted in lieu of just complete fantastic wild abandon, but they are interpreted based on some fixed elements that have already been established, like where the character is, what the character is doing, who the character has interacted with, those types of things. And that's, for me, that's part of playing, right? Putting the map together is playing. Putting the NPCs together and stocking them with, personality and things like that, that's playing. It's, again, DM mode, not player mode, right? I've even created a mini dungeon. For that, I created, there's lots of different ways of generating a dungeon, but I created some cards. There's just simple blank cards, and I just created, some elements, and I just randomly, mix them up and draw 4 or 5, create a small mini dungeon based on that. And again, it's interpretation of that. And I'm leaving things undecided or empty, and then letting the dice fill things out as my character incorporates or interacts with them. If I was a DM, I was doing this for players, I would actually build out a more elaborate dungeon, populating it so that I was prepared to run it for the character. So I would name the dungeon, I would put a theme to it. I'm leaving those elements blank or unanswered in my solo gaming, so that in the moment while I'm playing, these elements could be discovered by my character in the moment. The other thing is using the Oracle, putting the questions in first person, right? So, so I'll set up a scene really quickly. So, yesterday, Moro, the Hobbit, was talking over a beer, some fish and chips or whatever, with my dwarf Orn, and he mentioned that there were these ruins out in the woods, but he thinks about them and worries about them. The halfling does, but it's within a few miles of town, but there doesn't seem to be anything happening with that. So then earlier today, again using the Milton method, Orn the dwarf decided to pack everything up, get it right, and he just kind of go exploring of these ruins. And then moments ago he arrived and he found the ruins, explored them, and we begin our scene with him finding stairs going down, right? And so right away, I come, what's the question? So instead of saying, has there been any activity, I put that in first person. So I'd say, does Orn notice any signs of activity? So right there, he's going to make a search check, determine whether or not that he determined whether or not he sees the elements of action activity around the stairs, around the ruins, and let the dice decide that, right? Not at the DM or the player, but then react to it appropriately. Now, is it possible, if I was a DM, I'd be more omniscient and I would know, yes, something's happened there, and then I'd be rolling to see, instead of a yes or no question on an oracle, I'd be rolling to see if my perception or my search or against my wisdom, to see if I can get that information out of the DM, right? Well, I'm the DM and I'm the player, so I'm letting the question kind of fall into that personal mode of what the player character sees, right? And in fact, it's possible that he fails to see, right? So the answer of the oracle comes back and says, no, you don't see anything, or there's no signs. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been activity there. It's just that he failed to notice that, right? So there's still an open question as to whether there's something going on there or not. And then proceed through the adventure in stages and steps at that point. One of the things I'd like to see and discover is survivability of the character, right? Giving the character some plot armor. You can talk about that a little bit. And then finally, writing stuff down, creating the town, creating the NPCs, creating the dungeon, filling these things out in these details. And I can use those in a future game if I play with player characters, other players, not solo. And so that's kind of how I've approached this gaming situation. Go ahead and ask any questions or comments. I'll see if I can get this series going. Maybe I'll do a couple of sessions specifically around this character. And yeah, go ahead and put some comments below, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.